I had a friend in the Navy, just visited him a little bit ago. In the Navy, we had this leadership. It's kind of funny. You'd have a lot of times the captain of the ship had a certain personality we called the yeller and screamer. It was like, we're like, oh, what's the captain? Oh, he's a yeller and screamer. Okay. Which means if something went wrong or he didn't like something, I mean, he yelled and screamed at his people. And it's a good way to get results, and somebody remembers and they change. However, so it looks effective, gets results. However, it doesn't build respect and it doesn't build trust. You have people walking around in fear. I remember one of the ships I was visiting as a training, and yeah, the junior officers were afraid to go up on the bridge when the captain was there. I felt like they were like shaking because they're going to get yelled at and screamed at. You don't learn well in that environment. You don't get better because you're like this. You aren't willing to grow. You're like closed off. And so my friend Jim had this yeller and screamer captain. He was on, I don't know, like there for however long, and maybe 3 months. I think it's 3 months, yeah. And so he gets a new captain on board. And they literally had a bomb go off on the ship. He was on the bridge. Big explosion. Captain's on the bridge, or was quickly on the bridge. They're trying to figure out what the hell happened, get things organized and straightened out. And Jim is, recommending captain, we should do X, Y, and Z. We need to get the ship up to speed, 10 knots. And the captain was real calm. And he was like, I think that's fine for now. Let's just don't do anything with that. Let's get the lights on. Let's check that guy over there who's, guy's knocked to the ground. It's like, let's get some medical help to these people. Let's see how they're doing. Okay, let's take care of these things. This was up on the bridge. And in the back of his mind, already, because he didn't know this captain very well, just got on board. Already, like Jim's nervous system relaxed. And part of his brain, along with like, oh, okay, we're going to go take care of this. This was like, oh, it could be like this. Oh, okay. Because here was the thing. What he saw right then, because he hadn't seen that kind of leadership, he's like, that's the kind of cool, calm head you want when shit's going down. They're going to think through what really needs to be done, and they're going to be able to prioritize and take care of the real thing. And so his leadership style, among other things, changed. Later, some other incidents has caused him to change it later. And so when he began to practice that, he was in the kind of control center, combat center, and they got the radars of what all the ships are doing, planes are doing. And he liked it calm and quiet. People talking in soft tones. It's like, that's the way it ran. He's like, and what he found out is he didn't have to yell and scream. And when he did, like something was people were out of line, he just raised his voice a little. He's like, what are you doing? He just up it just a tiny bit. And people right away were like, oh, okay. He'd get the change he wanted with a minimal effort. Whereas before he used to feel he had to yell and scream. That built respect and trust, instead of people operating by fear. And particularly in military, when shit is going down and crazy and it's combat, there's bombs going off. I want to know that the guy in charge is cool-headed. He's present. He's not losing his mind yelling and screaming, because if you're yelling and screaming, you're like, he doesn't even control his own attention. Why would I think he can control the situation in a good way? So that was something I just hadn't thought it all the way through at the time, but I instinctively knew among those personalities that I was dealing with. I'm like, no, I trust the guy who's, when it's getting really wild and chaotic, who gets calm. That's what I trust, and that's a different kind of leadership than how we think of the yelling and screaming and being in charge. Even if it's without anger, even just yelling and screaming, it's like you can do it in a calm way. So but you have to have that. There's a certain energy that if you're not listened to, that you can go to, you're like, I have no problem getting loud if we need to. But we don't need to yet. So if I need to get your attention other ways, I will. I did the same when I was in the Navy, and not the same yelling and screaming. Never did the yelling and screaming, but I was under pressure caving inward. And I was in the control room of the power plant, and we were having maintenance, and it was this massive overhaul. It was overwhelming. It was a 6-hour shift twice a day on duty days, and phone calls and radios and people coming in the door with maintenance and changes and testing. And there's a test engineer right next to you walking you through tests, and you could have 8 things going on. And I was new. I wasn't used to it. In the early days, by the end, I was exhausted. I was just, there was nothing left. And towards the end of a 6-hour shift, I could feel myself just becoming unglued, like not even remembering basic things. And it was scary. It was like, I'm not holding it together. I'm not keeping up with the workflow. I'm going to miss something because I'm not even thinking straight. And I very distinctly had a day. Before I went on watch, you go through the plant, and I was touring everything. And then I go brief the oncoming shift. Hey, this is a test. This is what we're doing. This is what the safety procedures is what we're looking out for, right? I hadn't even briefed the crew, oncoming crew. I was just walking through the plant to find out what was going on. And my mind was in the middle of the shift, imagining how bad it was going to get, how stressful it was going to be, and how I was going to start missing things and just freeze up. I was getting panicky before I even got in the control room. And I was like, man, this kind of feeling was, arriving hour 5 of 6. And now it's happening before I even get in the control room. If I go in there, I'm screwed. If it starts here, I've got 6 hours to go. I'm like, I'm screwed. And so I'm like, I have got to take charge of this thing. I can't let it control me. And it was like deep down, kind of like, that's it. I am not going there. I am not going to let this thing overwhelm me. I am going to take charge of it. I'm going to lead it, whatever it takes. And so there was this attitude shift, which I'd kind of done before in training. I'm like, I have to go after this. And when it was, it's because it was a matter of survival in a way. It's like if I don't confidently stay ahead of this thing and have this attitude that I've got it, I'll have the other attitude. If I don't have it, I'm losing control. I'm overwhelmed, paralysis. I'm like, I am going to confidently believe I'm going to put this in order. I've got this. And be in charge of the chaos instead of it drag me along. And I just started to change what I was doing in the control room and my attitude and the way I spoke to people. And somebody wants to come in and I'm like, I could feel myself like I'm right at that edge of what I can handle. And I'm like, nope, come back in 5 minutes. They asked permission to enter the control room, which is, we always said yes, and it was just automatic. You let everybody in, like, and I was started to say no. And people were like, what? And I'm like, I don't, like, but 10 minutes, come back in 10, get out. Like, okay. You know, and I had no tolerance for confusion or somebody didn't have their stuff together. I didn't sit down and help them figure it out. I'm like, get out, go get it fixed. I'm not solving this for you. Like, I had my limits and I had my boundaries. I'm like, this is what we got to do. And I didn't care if I was an asshole. I didn't care if I was polite. You know, after a while I could tone it down and I could handle more and I could let more in and all that. But in that stage, man, it was, the dream was getting to me and I was like, this is how I have to do it. Because sometimes things are not running well and people know it. And if nobody does anything about it, doesn't get in there and go take care of it, it everybody else, it takes everybody down.
Yeah.
And so they feel that like, we need to fix this part over here. And sometimes it takes a directness because the person wasn't figuring it out on their own. You don't have them train. He's not with that self-awareness level. It's like, hey, Mike, I'm overwhelmed. I need help. Our egos don't allow for that typically. You know, until you really work with a team, you're like, okay, when we find this is what we're going to do next time. You know, you know, this is how we'll handle this situation. This is when we're going to notice what's going wrong, where it's going off the mark, and this is how we're going to ask for help, or we're going to change the process here. It's like, now you can have a learning process about it so that other people can bring it kind of back on track in the future, perhaps. That's another level. But sometimes it's like, you got to save everybody. And it's suffer no fools at that moment. That was, I remember a guy ended up having an email chat years later because he was on the ship. He was on the ship and he was taking my course. And I asked him, I was like, what was I like to work with? He was like, oh, you suffered no fools. So one of the things he said, I was like, yeah, didn't tolerate bullshit. And there just wasn't, I didn't have the energy for it.